The rain fell like a curtain drawn over the city, heavy and relentless, blurring the streetlights into soft halos of gold. It was the kind of storm that made people hurry home, clutching umbrellas and ducking into doorways. But on the corner of Madison and 8th, a woman sat motionless on a soaked park bench, as if the storm were the least of her concerns. Her name was Claire Whitmore, 34, executive vice president at one of Seattle's top design firms. Polished, respected, envied, at least, that's what the glossy exterior suggested. But tonight, the woman in the tailored gray coat was a ghost of herself. Her mascara bled down her cheeks, her breath caught in uneven sobs. And her phone lay shattered at her feet, the screen spiderwebbed from the throw that had punctuated the end of her world. 3 hours earlier, Claire's life had been perfect, or at least she had convinced herself it was. A corner office, an upcoming promotion to partner, an engagement to Ryan Alden, a venture capitalist, with a smile that charmed everyone except the woman who had finally seen the truth behind it. She had come home early, takeout in hand, ready to celebrate the closing of a massive deal. Instead, she found Ryan laughing in the kitchen with another woman. A woman wearing Claire's robe and drinking wine from Claire's favorite glass. Her voice had cracked when she asked how long it had been going on. His answer had been worse than the betrayal itself. "Does it matter? You're always so busy. We're not happy." Now, soaked to the bone and numb with heartbreak, Claire stared at the glowing city skyline through sheets of rain. The life she'd built, the one she'd believed in, had crumbled with a single truth. And beneath the ache of betrayal was a deeper, more unsettling question. If none of it was real, who was she without it? Cars hissed by on wet asphalt, their headlights cutting through the storm. Nobody stopped. Nobody even looked. To them, she was just another stranger in the rain, a detail in the city's endless motion. And then, one pair of footsteps slowed. "Are you all right?" The voice was deep, steady, with a warmth that cut through the cold night air. Claire blinked through the rain, her tear-blurred vision sharpening on the man, standing a few feet away. He held a faded black umbrella and wore a weathered green jacket soaked at the sleeves. His eyes, dark and kind, studied her with genuine concern. "I'm fine." She lied automatically, wiping at her cheeks though it made no difference. "You don't look fine," he said gently. "And sitting here in the middle of a storm isn't exactly ideal." She almost laughed at the understatement. "I needed air." He tilted his head, glancing at the empty streets around them. "Seems like the whole city's holding its breath tonight." Something about the way he spoke. Not pitying, not prying, just present. Made her exhale a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "Do you need help?" he asked after a beat. "A ride. A phone to call someone." "I don't have anyone to call," she murmured. "Not anymore." He shifted slightly, crouching to meet her gaze at eye level. "Then let me at least get you out of this rain. There's a diner a block from here. Warm coffee, dry seats, no questions." Claire hesitated. The storm soaked through her clothes, but a lifetime of social conditioning echoed in her mind. Don't talk to strangers. Don't trust people you don't know. He must have seen the uncertainty in her eyes, because he stepped back, giving her space. "It's your call," he said simply. "But it's cold, and you look like you could use a cup of something warm." She almost said no, almost let pride and fear keep her on that bench. But something in his expression, that quiet patience, that lack of expectation, disarmed her defenses. "Fine," she said softly, standing on trembling legs. "Coffee sounds good." The man smiled, a small, reassuring curve of his lips. "I'm Elijah." "Claire," she replied. "Nice to meet you, Claire." Even if the circumstances aren't great. They walked in silence through the rain. Elijah kept his umbrella angled, more over her than himself. And though they exchanged few words, the silence was oddly comfortable. The diner was small and old-fashioned, its neon sign buzzing faintly above the door. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of fresh coffee and the sizzle of frying bacon. A jukebox in the corner hummed a soft Motown tune, and a waitress behind the counter greeted Elijah by name. "Back again," she teased. "Rescuing people from bad nights is kind of my thing," he joked. Pulling the door open for Claire, she managed a faint smile. "Do you make a habit of this?" "Only on Tuesdays," he replied. "And rainy Thursdays." They slid into a booth by the window. Elijah ordered 2 coffees without asking her preference. "Trust me," he said. "This place makes the best cup in the city." For the first few minutes, they sat without speaking. Claire wrapped her hands around the warm mug, letting the heat seep into her bones. Elijah didn't fill the silence with questions or clichés. He simply waited, his gaze steady but unintrusive. It was she who finally broke the quiet. "I walked in on my fiancé with someone else tonight." He didn't flinch, didn't rush to offer empty sympathy. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "That's a brutal way to find out the truth." "It's more than that," she said, her voice trembling. "It feels like my whole life was built on a lie. Everything I worked for, everything I believed in, it's gone." "It's not gone," Elijah replied. "It's just shifting. And maybe it's time for it to shift." She frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Sometimes," he said, stirring sugar into his coffee, "life has to fall apart so we can see what was never really ours to begin with." Claire stared into her cup, his words settling deep inside her. It was the first thing anyone had said all night that didn't feel hollow. "Were you always this philosophical?" she asked. He chuckled. "Only after enough mistakes of my own." The clock above the counter ticked steadily, rain pattering softly against the windows. And for the first time in hours, Claire felt something unfamiliar. Not happiness, not even peace, but the faintest flicker of hope. The coffee grew cold between them as the night deepened, but neither seemed eager to leave. The rain outside had softened from a relentless downpour into a steady, soothing rhythm, like the world itself had slowed down to let them breathe. Claire found herself talking, really talking, in a way she hadn't in years. About the endless pressure of being perfect, about the loneliness that came with success, about the quiet ache of realizing she'd built a life that looked impressive, but felt empty. Elijah didn't interrupt. He didn't try to fix her pain or fill the silences with platitudes. He just listened, nodding occasionally. His eyes steady and warm, as if nothing she could say would make him see her differently. It was unnerving at first, and then it was liberating. "You know," she said finally, tracing the rim of her coffee cup with a fingertip, "I spent my whole adult life chasing a version of happiness that someone else designed for me. Good job, perfect apartment, respectable fiancé. And I told myself that if I could just keep everything under control, I'd be safe. But I wasn't safe. I was just numb." He leaned back, studying her. "Control's a funny thing," he said. "We think it's the key to happiness, but sometimes it's the very thing that keeps us from feeling alive." "Were you always this wise?" she asked with a faint smile. "Not even close," he admitted. "Most of what I know, I learned the hard way." Something in his voice, a heaviness beneath the calm, made her curious. "What happened to you?" He hesitated, glancing out the rain-streaked window as if weighing how much to share. "I grew up in South Chicago. Not the worst neighborhood, but not great either. My mom worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table. My dad left when I was 8. For a long time I was angry. At him, at the world, at everything. That anger almost swallowed me whole. Claire listened, captivated by the openness in his voice. I was 18 when I got arrested for the first time, he continued. Wrong place, wrong friends. I wasn't even the one who did anything, but it didn't matter. The system doesn't care about details when you're a young black man in a hoodie. They threw me in holding for 3 days, no charges, no apology. Just a record that followed me for years. I'm sorry, she said quietly. Don't be, he replied. It was a turning point. I realized I could let that anger define me, or I could use it to do something better. So I got out. I moved here, started driving nights while I put myself through community college. I'm studying counseling now. I want to help kids like me find a way out before they make choices they can't undo. There was no bitterness in his tone, only a steady strength that came from surviving and transforming pain into purpose. Claire found herself admiring him more than she expected. Why counseling? She asked. Because someone did it for me, he said simply. A mentor. He saw something in me I couldn't see in myself. He taught me that my story didn't have to end where it started. And I guess now I want to do the same for others. The silence that followed was soft, thoughtful. Claire stared into her half-empty mug, his words stirring something inside her. A faint, persistent question she hadn't asked herself in years. What am I doing with my life? You ever feel like you don't know who you are anymore? She asked suddenly. Elijah smiled knowingly. All the time. But here's the thing. Not knowing isn't failure. It's the start of figuring it out. She exhaled, a shaky breath that carried months of pent-up exhaustion. I don't even know where to start. Start with one small choice, he said. Something that feels real. Something that isn't about expectations or appearances. She considered that, staring out at the rain. I used to paint, she murmured, almost to herself. Nothing serious. Just for fun. I stopped when things got busy. Then maybe you should start again, he said gently. Not because it'll fix everything, but because it's yours. Because it makes you feel like you. For a long moment, they sat without speaking, the weight of the night settling into something softer. Claire felt lighter somehow. Not because her problems had vanished, but because for the first time, she felt like she wasn't carrying them alone. The waitress refilled their cups and smiled knowingly. You two want dessert? It's on the house if you promise to smile at least once tonight. Claire actually laughed. A real laugh, not the polite, practice sound she'd mastered in boardrooms. Maybe just pie, she said. Best choice you'll make all night. The waitress winked, disappearing behind the counter. They ate slowly, sharing stories between bites of warm apple pie. Elijah told her about the kids he mentored, about the poetry his mother loved, about the community garden he and his neighbors tended in the summer. Claire told him about her childhood in Vermont, her love of painting, the pressure she'd felt since college to be someone. With each story, the distance between them shrank until it felt like they'd known each other far longer than a few hours. And yet, despite the growing closeness, Elijah never once tried to blur the line into something more. He was just there, steady, grounded, present. When they finally stepped back into the night, the rain had dwindled to a mist. The city glistened under streetlights, steam rising from storm drains like the earth exhaling. Do you live nearby? Elijah asked as they walked. About 10 blocks east, she said. I can walk from here. I'll walk you, he offered. You don't have to. I know, he said with a small smile. But I want to. The streets were quiet now, the chaos of the storm replaced by the soft hush of a city at rest. They walked side by side, not speaking much, and yet the silence felt full. Of understanding, of gratitude, of something new forming between two people who had entered each other's lives at exactly the right moment. When they reached her building, Claire turned to him. "Thank you," she said sincerely, "for the coffee, for listening, for everything." "You don't owe me thanks," he replied. "We're all just trying to find our way. Sometimes that means stopping for someone sitting in the rain." She smiled, feeling that flicker of hope grow a little stronger. "Still, I'm glad you stopped." Oh, he nodded, tipping his umbrella in a playful half salute. "Get some rest, Claire, and maybe buy a new phone tomorrow." She laughed, waving as he walked away, disappearing into the mist like some quiet miracle she'd been lucky enough to stumble into. When she finally stepped inside, her apartment felt different. It was the same space, same walls, same furniture, but it no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a place where she might start over. For the first time in a long time, Claire believed she could. The next morning, the rain had stopped, but its scent still clung to the air, a faint trace of petrichor that made the city feel newly washed. Claire woke with puffy eyes and a dull ache in her chest, but there was something else too. A strange, unexpected steadiness. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't even peace. But it was the quiet certainty that, maybe for the first time in years, her story wasn't over. She made coffee and sat by the window, watching the city wake up. The events of the night before played in her mind. The park bench, Elijah's umbrella. The diner's warm glow, their conversations that had felt deeper than anything she'd shared in years. It had been a single evening, and yet, it felt like a pivot point, a before and after. She didn't know if she'd ever see him again. Maybe their paths had crossed just for that night, but the things he'd said lingered, especially one line, "Start with one small choice." And so she did. She pulled a dusty box from her closet, an old set of watercolor paints, untouched for nearly a decade. At first, the brush felt awkward in her hand. Her lines were clumsy, her colors messy, but as the morning sun streamed in and music played softly from her speakers, Claire lost track of time. For 3 hours, she wasn't a heartbroken executive or a betrayed fiancé. She was just a woman painting for no reason other than it made her feel alive. Later that afternoon, a message arrived in her inbox from Ryan. "Ryan, can we talk? I think we owe each other that." She stared at the screen for a long time, her stomach twisting. A week ago, she would have answered immediately, desperate for closure, terrified of losing what they had. But now, the question that echoed louder than his request was, "Do I even want to talk?" She typed a short reply. "Claire, there's nothing left to say. Please respect that." And with one click, she deleted his number from her phone. It was a small decision, maybe even a trivial one, but it felt monumental. It was the first boundary she'd drawn in years, and it wasn't about him. It was about her. 3 days passed. Life began to find a rhythm again. Claire returned to work, handled meetings, fielded questions about the broken engagement with polite vagueness. But something in her demeanor had shifted. Colleagues noticed it, though they couldn't name it. The confident, composed executive was still there, but beneath the surface was someone new. A woman who was beginning to reclaim her life. And then, on the 4th evening, as she left the office under a lavender dusk sky, she saw him. Elijah. He was standing across the street leaning against a lamppost, umbrella in hand even though the sky was clear. When he spotted her, his face lit up with a warm, genuine smile, the kind that reached his eyes. "Hey," he said, crossing the street. "I was hoping I might run into you again." "Were you?" She teased, her heart inexplicably racing. "Maybe I checked the diner a few times," he admitted with a laugh. "But I figured fate might handle it." "Well, fate delivered," she said, smiling despite herself. "Do you want to grab a coffee?" "Only if we can go somewhere new," he replied. "I know a spot you'll like." They walked together through the evening crowd, their steps unconsciously sensing. Elijah led her to a small independent bookstore cafe tucked between two brick buildings. The kind of place you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. Inside, walls of bookshelves climbed toward the ceiling, and mismatched armchairs were scattered around small tables. Claire loved it instantly. They ordered coffee and found a quiet corner. Conversation flowed easily. About books, music, the places they wanted to travel, the foods they'd always wanted to try. But somewhere between jokes and stories, their talk drifted back to deeper things. "Have you painted again?" he asked. She blinked in surprise. "How did you know?" "You mentioned it that night. Figured you might pick it back up." "I did," she admitted. "It was terrible at first, but it felt good. Like I was doing something that belonged only to me," he grinned. "That's the point. It's not about being good, it's about being real." They sat in silence for a moment, sipping coffee as the soft hum of jazz filled the space. Then Elijah spoke again, his voice quieter this time. "Can I be honest with you? Please." "I wasn't sure I'd see you again," he said. "But I kept thinking about you. Not because you were sad or because I wanted to fix anything, but because I saw someone who was ready to change, and that's rare." Her chest tightened. "I think I was," she admitted. "Still am. Good," he said softly. "Because change isn't a one-time thing. It's 1,000 little choices. And from what I can tell, you're already making them." Claire swallowed past the lump in her throat. "What about you? Are you where you want to be?" He chuckled, glancing down at his coffee. "Not yet. But I'm closer than I was. I'm finishing my degree this spring. After that, I want to open a youth center, a place where kids like me, kids who've been written off, can find mentors, safe spaces, opportunities." She smiled. "That's incredible." "It's a dream," he said. "And I've learned dreams only happen when you share them. Alone, they're just ideas. But with the right people." He trailed off, his gaze meeting hers. "They become possible." Something passed between them then, a flicker of recognition, of understanding. It wasn't dramatic or cinematic. It was quieter, deeper, like two people realizing they were walking parallel paths that just might, lead in the same direction. The night wore on. They lingered long after their cups were empty, the city outside dimming to darkness. And when they finally stepped out into the cool night air, Claire felt that flicker of hope bloom into something steadier. "Walk you home," he offered. "Only if you promise to make it a habit," she said, half teasing, half hopeful. He grinned. "We'll see." They walked slowly, their hands brushing once then again, until, without words, they intertwined. And in that simple gesture, there was something unmistakable. The beginning of something neither of them had planned, but both suddenly wanted. That night, as Claire drifted to sleep, she realized that her tears on the park bench had marked the end of one story. But what Elijah had given her, a moment of kindness, a new perspective, a reason to believe again, was the beginning of another. Weeks passed, and the rhythms of Claire's life began to change in ways that were subtle but profound. She still worked long hours, still attended board meetings, still signed contracts and reviewed proposals. But there was more to her days now than just work. Her mornings sometimes began with painting, her evenings with coffee and conversations at the little bookstore cafe, and almost every weekend included some moment with Elijah, exploring a new part of the city, volunteering at a community center, or simply walking through the rain with no destination in mind. Their connection deepened, not through dramatic declarations but through small, consistent gestures, the kind that built trust one brick at a time. Elijah never rushed her, never demanded that she move faster than she was ready. And Claire, for the first time in her adult life, allowed herself to slow down. To feel instead of perform. To explore instead of control. One Saturday morning, Elijah invited her to visit the youth mentorship program where he volunteered. The building was an old recreation center tucked between a row of townhouses, its walls covered with murals painted by local teens, bold splashes of color depicting strength, resilience, and hope. Inside, kids of all ages worked on projects, played basketball, and huddled in corners doing homework. Everyone. Elijah announced with a grin, "This is Claire. She's a friend." A chorus of, "Aye, Claire," echoed through the room, and she couldn't help but smile. It had been a long time since anyone had greeted her with such unfiltered warmth. As they walked through the space, Elijah introduced her to students, some shy, some bold, all curious. One girl named Keisha showed Claire the short story she was writing about growing up in a neighborhood where people underestimated her. A boy named Luis proudly presented the model rocket he'd built for his science project. And then there was Harmony, a quiet, serious-eyed 15-year-old who told Claire she wanted to be a lawyer, so no one could ever say people like me don't belong in the courtroom. Claire listened to their stories with a lump in her throat. These kids weren't defined by the challenges they faced. They were defined by their determination to rise above them. And Elijah, she realized, was a big part of that. He didn't just mentor them, he believed in them. And that belief, more than anything, was what gave them courage. "You're really good with them," she said quietly as they watched Harmony help a younger student with his homework. "They don't need me to be good," Elijah replied. "They just need someone to see them. Most of the time, that's all any of us really want." His words lingered in her mind long after they left the center. That night, as they walked home beneath a sky streaked with pink and gold, Claire found herself speaking words she hadn't planned to say. "You've changed the way I see the world." He glanced at her, his brow furrowing. "How so?" "I used to think success was about how much you could achieve. The title, the paycheck, the apartment with a view. But now," she hesitated, searching for the right words, "now I think it's about how much of yourself you give. About the lives you touch. About what you leave behind that isn't measured in numbers." Elijah smiled, slow and thoughtful. "Maybe it's both," he said. "Maybe real success is building something that matters and using it to lift other people up." They stopped at the edge of a small park, the city lights glimmering through the trees. Claire turned to face him. "Do you ever wonder if we met for a reason?" "All the time," he admitted. "But I try not to overthink it. I just know I'm glad we did." They stood there for a moment, the silence between them filled with everything they didn't need to say. And then, without fanfare or hesitation, Elijah reached for her hand. She met him halfway, their fingers threading together like they'd always belonged that way. From then on, their lives became more intertwined. Claire started volunteering at the Mentorship Center on Thursdays, helping students with resumes and college essays. Elijah visited her office once a week, giving short talks to employees about diversity and inclusion. They supported each other's dreams, hers of launching a creative scholarship for underprivileged teens, his of turning the mentorship program into a fully funded youth center. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of doubt, moments when the ghosts of Claire's past whispered that she wasn't good enough or that she was foolish for believing in something so different from the life she'd built. And there were moments when Elijah's own scars resurfaced, the weight of prejudice, the frustration of systemic obstacles, the sting of people's assumptions about who he was and what he was worth. But they faced those challenges the way they faced everything else together. One evening, about 2 months after that rainy night on the park bench, Claire invited Elijah to accompany Gala, a high-profile event filled with industry leaders, investors, and media. She was nervous about it. The corporate world had always been a space where appearances mattered more than authenticity. She worried how people might react to Elijah, how they might judge them as a couple. Elijah noticed her tension as they stepped into the glittering ballroom. "Breathe," he murmured. "You don't owe anyone an explanation for who you choose to stand beside." She took a deep breath, squeezing his hand. "I'm not worried about them," she said. "I'm worried about me, about slipping back into the person I used to be." "Then don't," he said simply. "You've come too far to shrink for anyone." It wasn't easy. There were whispers, subtle glances, forced smiles, the kind of condescension that hid behind polite words. One executive asked Elijah if he was in the service industry. Another joked about Claire, slumming it for love. But Claire surprised herself. She didn't shrink. She didn't laugh along. She introduced Elijah proudly, as a counselor in training, as a mentor, as a man who was building something that mattered. And when one particularly arrogant board member made a comment about social climbing, she smiled coolly and said, "If you can't see the value in a man who makes the world better, maybe you're climbing the wrong ladder." Later, as they left the event, Elijah glanced at her with admiration. "I don't think I've ever seen you so fearless." "I wasn't fearless," she admitted. "I was furious. But I guess I'm learning how to turn that into something stronger." He laughed softly. "You're learning a lot these days." "So are you," she replied, slipping her hand into his. "And I think we're just getting started." Cumulative word count, 4,000. Would you like me to continue with the final section 5, 1,000 words, to complete the full 5,000-word script? You said next, ChatGPT said. Section 5, 1,000 words. A spring came slowly to the city, the gray skies giving way to bursts of green and blossoms that lined the streets. By then, Claire and Elijah's lives were no longer running parallel. They had woven together in ways neither of them had expected. What began as a chance meeting in the storm had grown into a partnership built on trust, respect, and something deeper than either had known before. Claire found herself more present, more alive than she'd been in years. She still worked, still thrived in her career, but her world was no longer defined by it. She painted every weekend, sometimes alone, sometimes with Elijah sketching beside her while music played softly in the background. She laughed more, cried more, lived more. And it startled her to realize how much life she'd been missing. One Sunday afternoon, Elijah brought her to meet his grandmother, the woman he often spoke about with reverence. Her name was Ruth Hayes, a woman in her 70s with silver, streaked hair and eyes that seemed to carry the wisdom of generations. "So, you're the one who pulled my grandson out of the rain," Ruth said, with a knowing smile as she hugged Claire. "I think it was the other way around," Claire replied honestly, and Ruth's laughter filled the room. Dinner was warm and lively. Fried chicken, collard greens, cornbread, stories shared over the table. Claire felt something she hadn't felt in years, a sense of belonging. Not because she fit in perfectly, but because she was accepted as she was. After dinner, Ruth took Claire's hand. "Loving someone across difference isn't always easy," she said softly. "People will talk. Some won't understand. But love isn't about them. It's about what you choose every day, especially when it's hard." Claire nodded, her throat tight. "I know," she whispered. "And I'm ready for that." Ruth's eyes softened. "Then you'll be just fine." That night, as they drove home, Elijah reached over and laced his fingers through hers. "She likes you," he said simply. Claire smiled, tears pricking her eyes. I like her too. Life continued to unfold in moments big and small. Together, they launched a fundraiser for the youth mentorship program, turning Elijah's dream of a community center into a reality. Claire used her corporate connections to gather sponsors, while Elijah rallied volunteers and families from the neighborhood. The night they announced they had raised enough to purchase the old recreation building, Elijah turned to Claire with tears in his eyes. We did it, he whispered. No, she corrected gently. You did it. I just helped shine a light on what was already there. But he shook his head. No, Claire. We did this. Together. The Beacon House opened 6 months later, its doors wide to anyone in need. Kids, families, anyone seeking a safe place to grow and heal. On opening day, Claire stood beside Elijah as he cut the ribbon, her heart swelling with pride. When he spoke to the crowd, his words carried the weight of lived experience. This place exists because kindness is stronger than prejudice, because second chances are real, and because no one should ever be left in the storm alone. The applause that followed was thunderous, but Claire's eyes never left Elijah. She saw not just the man who had found her on a rain-soaked night, but the man who had helped her find herself again. Later, when the crowd had dispersed and the sun dipped low over the city, Elijah pulled her aside. His expression was serious, his voice low. Claire, he said, there's something I've been meaning to ask you. Her heart skipped. What is it? He took a deep breath. That night, when I saw you on the bench, I thought I was the one helping you. But the truth is, you saved me too. You reminded me why I kept going, why I believed in change. You've been my partner, my friend, my safe place. And I don't want to imagine my life without you. The Claire's eyes filled with tears as he pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside was a simple ring, nothing flashy, just a band of silver with a small stone that caught the fading light. Marry me, Elijah whispered. Not because we're perfect, not because life will be easy, but because together we're stronger than anything the world can throw at us. Because you're the person I want to keep choosing, storm after storm. For a moment, Claire couldn't speak. The memory of that night on the bench, her tears, her broken phone, the weight of her world collapsing, flashed through her mind. And then she remembered the umbrella, the diner, the laughter over pie, the way Elijah had seen her when she thought she was invisible. Yes, she said through her tears, her voice trembling but sure. Yes, I'll marry you. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and she pulled him into an embrace, holding him as if letting go wasn't an option. The world around them faded. The city, the noise, the weight of their pasts. All that remained was this moment, and the certainty that what they had was real. In the months that followed, they built a life together that was imperfect but honest. They faced whispers and judgments, but they also faced laughter, love, and a community that grew stronger around them. And on quiet nights, when the rain fell against the windows, they would sit side by side, hands intertwined, remembering the night it all began. Because in the end, the story wasn't about the storm or the tears, or even the betrayal that had brought Claire to that bench. It was about what came after, about the stranger who chose kindness, about the woman who chose to start over, about two people who discovered that love isn't about perfection. It's about courage. And as the rain washed the city clean once more, Claire and Elijah knew that whatever storms lay ahead, they would face them together.